This here is Combermary Park. This is the site of an Indigenous burial ground, and a very extensive one with very unusual burial practices here. It was the activities of local soil contractors who were excavating in this area who accidentally came upon this burial ground. Archaeologists soon came in and excavated about 150 of these burials. It is estimated that this burial ground began operation in about the 7th century AD and continued right up until about the 1870s. So Broadbeach on the Gold Coast, what do we know? Well, there's beaches, there's canals, there's the Star Casino, there's Pacific Fair. But how did all this come to be? Almost the entire length of the Gold Coast was what we call a littoral rainforest. That's where the rainforest comes right up onto the beach, almost touching the ocean. Directly behind the beaches was what came to be known as the Great Swamp. This is where all the modern canal developments are today. This lovely park here is known as Cascade Gardens. This was the site of an Indigenous camp, and there are also remains of shell middens here. The effluent of the affluent. I'm walking along this little isthmus. This is the Tallebudgera Creek going all the way around here. It's part of the Cascade Gardens Park. Take a little walk down there. How intriguing.
The local Indigenous people referred to the Queensland's south coast as Kurungal, a name derived from their word for endless supplies of timber. This fact would influence the activities of the very first Europeans in the area.
This here is the Neddy Harper and William Duncan Park. That's the Nerang River right there, and just around the corner there is the entrance to Little Tallebudgera Creek. The reason why I'm here is that in the 1850s, Ned Harper set up a little jetty, a little wharf here. It's somewhere around about where that little wharf is over there. That belongs to this new development over there. He set up this little wharf in this area here as kind of the middleman. Logs, cedar and pine and what have you, big ones, big red cedars, were being floated down the river. At that time it was the Barrow River, from up there, and they were brought here to this place because back then in the mid-19th century ships could come down the Nerang River and dock here and take their cargo of hardwood transported either up to Brisbane or down to Sydney.
Before arriving on the Nerang River, Ned Harper was a timber getter in northern New South Wales and lived with the local Indigenous people, and he spoke their language. He was known as a hatter, meaning a lone worker.
Apparently, Ned Harper's house was located somewhere in this Neddy Harper William Duncan Park.
In 1862, during a shortage of cotton as a result of the American Civil War, the Queensland Manchester Cotton Company selected 1,280 acres on the Nerang River. The company was run by the Muir brothers. They owned cotton plantations in Louisiana beforehand, employing slave labour. On this 1887 map, you can see that it's located just under the part of the Nerang River that looks like boobs. However, once the war was over, the demand for cotton waned and was replaced instead by sugar cultivation.
Some time after Ned Harper established a house here in this park here, his mother came to join him. She moved up from New South Wales, and by all accounts she had a fearsome reputation. She was known to fire her rifle at passers-by on the old Burleigh Road, causing other travellers to give this piece of land a very wide berth. It was in 1872 that government surveyor George Love Pratton set aside 288 acres of land right next to the beach and put it aside as camping ground. That's the area down there today. This makes Broadbeach unique on the Gold Coast in that the buildings don't go up to the sand, they don't go right up to the beach. This here is supposedly the final resting place of Ned Harper. He died in 1896. This plaque states that he is buried here. However, his death certificate states that he was buried at the Tallebudgera Cemetery. The plaque also does say that this spot right here, up on this little bit of high ground, was actually the site of an Indigenous camp, because Ned lived with the Indigenous people for quite a long time. It's a lovely spot here overlooking the little Tallebudgera Creek. It's just out that way. The ice cream van coming through here despite the total lack of children. If therefore this isn't the grave of Ned Harper, it begs the question, who is buried here? Was it his crazy mother?
In the 1920s, a new road was put through to become known as the Gold Coast Highway. This was built in response to the increasing popularity of the motor vehicle, and the road was intended to supersede the old Burleigh Road. The road also runs along the old division between the beach and the swampland. In this aerial photo from 1930, you can see that the entire Broadbeach area is virtually devoid of any development. But things were about to change.
In 1934, 280 acres of vacant Crown land was released by the Lands Department for the formation of a new township, about a kilometre south of Southport. It was to be along the Southport-Burleigh Road. That was the beginning of Broadbeach. However, development was very slow. People preferred to camp on their little pieces of land rather than actually build on them. In 1936, according to the Courier Mail, there were now 2.5 miles of roads in Broadbeach, most of them bitumen roads.
In 1941, the first post office opened at Armorick Avenue. It was later moved to Surf Parade on the back of a truck. The phone directory from the 1970s supposes that Concorde is about to land at what was then Coolangatta Airport. It never did. In the early 1940s, the sand at Broadbeach and at many other areas along the Gold Coast was being mined for rutile and zircon, which was then bagged and exported primarily to the United Kingdom and to the United States for the production of special alloy steels and welding equipment. The Gold Coast beaches were described as having the world's largest supply of zircon.
It was in the 1950s that there were many calls for the sand mining here to be shut down. There was one fellow in particular, his name was Edgar Ranking. He was president of the Broadbeach Development Association, and he wrote with these very prescient words, "Much can and must be done to beautify those same beaches and render them the worldwide tourist attraction they must inevitably become."
By 1953, the sand mining had left its mark on the landscape. On this map, you can see the absolute blank space that resulted from the sand mining.
By 1955, the sand mining companies had set about rehabilitating all of this sand area out here. You can see in this photo, it's pretty much now a clean slate, ready for the soon-to-happen residential and commercial developments. Right behind me there is the Oasis shopping centre and accommodation. This used to be the site in 1956 of Lennon's Hotel. That's when it opened. At the time, it was the tallest building on the Gold Coast. It was also known as the Oasis in the Desert because when it was built, this whole area, either side of it, north, south, east and west, was all surrounded by sand. It really was like a building in the middle of a desert. And Lennon's Hotel was also the site of the very first Schoolies event. And you can see in this photo taken in the bar of Lennon's Hotel, the patrons pretending to be having a good time while being surrounded by such dreadful postmodern architecture. Despite being a catalyst for further development on the Gold Coast, Lennon's Hotel was never a great financial success. The building was pulled down in 1987 to make way for the Oasis development.
In 1959, the Florida Gardens estate was built, and in the next year, the Miami Keys and Rio Vista Canal estates followed.
So you've got to remember, it wasn't always called the Gold Coast. This was the South Coast. And it was in 1958 that it officially became the Gold Coast, although that term had been used for quite a number of years.
In the 1960s, more and more houses were being built in the area. However, large gaps still remained in the landscape.
That's Little Tallebudgera Creek, running right in front of the Star Casino. That's an original creek, it's not part of the dredging for the canals. The land that the Star Casino sits on is known as Broadbeach Islands, the site of a very large caravan park. Truth be known though, this was never really originally an island. It became an island when the canals were dredged through here in the 1950s and 60s. Pacific Fair Shopping Centre. This was opened in 1977 at a cost of $17 million. I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago there was a massive upgrade and that cost about $670 million.
In 1986, the Conrad Jupiter's Casino and Hotel officially opened on Broadbeach Island. Conrad is the luxury arm of Hilton Hotels, while the name Jupiter comes from an indigenous man named Jupiter Mossman, who discovered large quantities of gold in North Queensland. In 2017, Jupiter's was rebranded as The Star and is now owned by the Star Entertainment Group.
The Oasis Shopping Centre opened in 1989 on the site of the old Lennon's Hotel. The monorail, which was here for many years, linked the Oasis Shopping Centre across this roundabout and then over that way to what was then Jupiter's Casino. There had been talk for quite a long time of extending the monorail lines. It never came to fruition. Really, it couldn't carry that many people. The whole thing was pulled down in 2017. Today, the monorail carriages reside at Mount Panorama in Bathurst. And just over that way is where the old monorail train station for Jupiter's Casino used to be. And that's where it was, just down there. Just down those stairs there. It's all blocked off now. The Gold Coast Convention and Exhibition Centre, that opened in 2004. Outside the building is a local landmark. A sculpture there of a seal and her pup. That was created by artist Len Shillham. Here's its story.
This sculpture was originally located beside the pool of Lennon's Hotel and acted as a filter. Upon the demolition of the hotel, it was relocated to a nearby Japanese restaurant before going missing. In 1997, it was recovered from the bottom of a canal by divers and moved temporarily to the Broadbeach State School after restoration. Today, of course, it's outside the Convention and Exhibition Centre.
I can't see the pup. I'll have to go around the other side. I think that the Gold Coast could only have happened in a post-war, post-modern world. For a long time, Broadbeach was pretty much just a gap on the map. Surfers Paradise and Burleigh Heads were in existence, but there was nothing here. Developers and council could pretty much put here whatever they wanted. I think it's very fitting that the very first substantial building in Broadbeach was a hotel. Having been on this journey through the history of Broadbeach, it's no secret that this area is virtually a man-made environment. There was the rainforest here with its branches almost dipping straight into the ocean. Then you had the timber getters. Later on there was the sand mining. And then pretty much everything here was just wiped clean. Then you get the canals coming in, hotels, housing, businesses, entertainment. And that's the Broadbeach we have today. However, despite all of those changes over more than 150 years, there is one place still in this area that retains a link to the past. And it was in 1988 that the 150 Indigenous remains that had been excavated in this park were returned to the ownership of the traditional custodians of this area. And those remains were reburied here in the park, about 300 metres from the exact spot where they were excavated. And it's incredible that when the remains were put back in the ground, they were put back in the same orientation and style as when they were first removed back in the 60s. I think this really is an early example of traditional remains being returned to the land that they came from and being reburied by their people, rather than sitting in some museum storage in a box somewhere. Bring them home.